A devastated mother discovers the impossible. When visiting her daughter's grave, a strange girl appears in tears, claiming that her own mother is buried there and not Emma's daughter. What is real? A deadly identity swap, a supposedly deceased daughter, and a secret so dark it could change everything. Get ready to uncover the terrifying truth that should never have come to light. Emma, an elderly and wealthy woman, lived an existence that seemed perfect to the outside observer. But inside, each day was a silent struggle, a constant reminder of the greatest loss of her life. 3 years ago, a car accident took her only daughter, Claire, leaving behind a mother with a broken heart. Emma's mornings began at the cemetery, where she would talk to Claire's tombstone, shedding tears and words that would never be heard. Time had not been a remedy but a cruel reminder. Everything in her house, from the paintings on the walls to the flowers in the garden, brought back memories of Claire. However, Emma struggled to keep up appearances, organizing charity events and managing her businesses as if she were in full form. But every smile was forced, every conversation was empty. No one knew about the loneliness she carried, the fear of never overcoming her grief. The world around her moved on, but Emma remained stuck in the past. The cemetery was a place of pain but also of reunions. Emma found herself reliving the sweetest memories with Claire, moments that now seemed so distant. The connection she had with her daughter was unbreakable, even in death. Deep down, she always wondered if she could have done something different, something that would have changed the outcome of that fateful night. But the past was a closed book, and all that remained was the longing that suffocated her in silence. It was strange how life continued even when someone's heart stopped beating. For Emma, the days were always the same, empty, without any renewal. But she kept going because that was what was expected of her. Claire's name was whispered only by those who knew of her pain, and even those whispers were like daggers. Emma had learned to live with the absence, to survive in a world where nothing made sense without her daughter by her side. However, there was one thing no one knew: guilt. Emma blamed herself for everything. For not protecting Claire, for not seeing the signs, for not being more present. It was a constant struggle, an internal duel that never seemed to end. Even when the sun shone brighter, Emma felt that grief was a shadow that would follow her forever. That feeling of emptiness, the fear of forgetting her daughter's voice, was a torment that consumed her daily. But that day, something different was about to happen. On her way to the cemetery, Emma felt a pang of anxiety, a chill down her spine that she couldn't explain. Maybe it was the weight of the years, or perhaps it was a portent, a warning that something was about to change. As she parked the car, she took a deep breath, feeling a strange mix of fear and expectation. It was as if the air was heavier, as if destiny was about to knock on her door. Emma walked slowly through the cemetery, the stones on the ground feeling colder and rougher than ever. When her eyes met Claire's tombstone, she noticed something different. A girl was there, kneeling, crying with her head down. Emma stopped, confused, her heart racing. The presence of the girl was unexpected, and her vulnerability awakened something in Emma, something she hadn't felt in a long time, a curiosity mixed with compassion. "Sorry," Emma said, her voice trembling, almost hesitant. The girl looked up, her eyes red from crying, and stared at Emma with a mixture of fear and hope. "My mother is buried here," the girl said, her voice breaking with each word. Emma was speechless, feeling as if the ground had vanished beneath her feet. Confusion took over, and a wave of emotions threatened to overflow, but she remained calm. What was the girl saying? Claire's tomb could not be someone else's. Emma's mind began to spin, a sense of vertigo taking over. There was something very wrong there, something that defied any logical explanation. What could be more devastating than the loss of Claire? Emma tried to organize her thoughts as the girl in front of her wiped away her tears with the back of her hand. The girl seemed fragile, but there was an intensity in her eyes, a sadness Emma recognized well. "You must be mistaken," Emma said softly, trying not to scare her. "This is my daughter's tomb, Claire." But the girl shook her head stubbornly, as if her words were an unshakable truth. "No," she insisted. "My mother, Anna, is buried here." Emma's head began to spin. Confusion mixed with disbelief took over. creating a knot in her chest. How could such a mistake occur? For 3 years, Emma lived with the certainty that this was the place where her daughter rested. The girl, named Samantha, spoke with such strong conviction that it sparked something in Emma, a flicker of doubt she never wanted to consider. Could there really be a swap, a truth buried under layers of pain and deception? Emma's heart raced, and anger mixed with her pain. "This can't be right," she murmured, almost as a plea to the universe to undo that moment. Samantha shrugged, as lost as Emma but determined to be heard. "My mother died 3 years ago too," the girl said, her voice choked. "And it has always been here that my father brought me to see her." It was impossible, such an unthinkable mystery that Emma could hardly process. Part of her wanted to turn away, to keep living in the denial that had sustained her for so long. But curiosity, even painful, was impossible to ignore. What if Samantha was right? And if, by some bizarre twist of fate, the truth about Claire was still out there, waiting to be discovered? The fear of hope, of renewal, was almost more terrifying than grief itself. But Emma knew that, somehow, she needed to find out what was happening. Taking a deep breath, Emma knelt beside Samantha, feeling the cold grass under her knees. "Tell me more about your mother," she asked, her voice slightly breaking. She didn't know where this would lead her, but she was willing to listen. Samantha's words were simple but carried the weight of grief that seemed to mirror her own. The girl spoke about Anna, describing a woman full of life and laughter that had been ripped from her world as abruptly as Claire had been from Emma's. The air seemed denser, and Emma could barely believe she was there, trying to unravel a mystery in the place that had been her sanctuary of pain. Something inside her trembled with fear of discovering that her own reality was a lie, fear of confronting truths she wasn't ready to face. But even with the fear, there was a growing strength, a determination that began to form. The same one that had arisen when Emma first held Claire, promising to protect her at any cost. Emma was not someone who ran away from challenges. Deep down, she had always been a determined woman, even when the world seemed to conspire against her. Maybe this determination was her only anchor now, her only way to move forward. Grief had transformed her, but now, this renewal of purpose was what made her breathe. She looked at Samantha, whose presence was both a mystery and a bridge to something greater. Maybe it was time to seek answers. "I need to investigate this," Emma said, more to herself than to Samantha. The girl just watched, perhaps feeling the weight of what her words had triggered. Emma stood up slowly, as if the weight of years of sadness was still on her shoulders, but with something different now, the spark of a new mission. Emma's life, once marked only by cemetery visits and lonely nights, was about to change irreversibly. With one last look at the tomb, Emma made a silent promise to herself and to the daughter she still loved more than anything. No matter what was necessary, she would uncover the truth. The mystery was calling, an enigma that seemed to have the power to change everything she thought she knew. Emma felt the first spark of hope and, at the same time, the fear of what that hope might mean. And so, destiny began to shape a new path, one she could not ignore. Emma returned home with her mind buzzing with conflicting thoughts. What Samantha had said at the cemetery haunted her like a recurring nightmare. Part of her wanted to forget everything, to cling to the life she had built amidst grief and continue visiting Claire's tomb, even if that place was full of secrets. "It's impossible," she murmured to herself, trying to convince herself. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the girl's face, and something in her heart began to give in. "Maybe I'm going crazy," Emma thought, running her hand through her gray hair. Her life was already a web of complicated emotions, and she didn't know if she had the strength to face another emotional earthquake. The pain of grief was familiar, almost a perverse comfort, while the idea of uncovering a different truth was a leap into the unknown. The idea of putting everything at stake, the remnants of her sanity, her own safety, seemed too great a risk. But fear came in waves. It wasn't just the fear of having hope again, but also of facing the possibility that maybe Claire was alive or that it was all a big misunderstanding. What if this investigation was just a path to more suffering? Emma found herself immersed in doubts, fear scratching the walls of her mind. Why disturb the little peace she had managed to achieve, even if it was precarious? Emma even tried to distract herself. She threw herself into work, organized charity dinners, filled her days with activities that kept her busy. But her mind wouldn't quiet down, and every moment of calm was filled with the echo of Samantha's voice. It was as if the girl had planted a seed that refused to stop growing. Emma didn't know if she wanted to water that seed or uproot it once and for all, but she couldn't decide. Fear held her back, like invisible chains. Nights were even worse. Emma stayed awake, reliving memories of Claire, trying to find a clue that something was wrong. She reread old messages, revisited events she might have ignored, but nothing made sense. Why can't I just forget? She felt like a prisoner of her own emotions, tied to the past and unable to move forward. And yet, the spark of curiosity continued to burn. I can't, Emma said aloud, trying to convince herself that it would be best to ignore everything. But she knew that, no matter how much she tried, the mystery was now part of her life. Her thoughts traveled to the cemetery, to the girl's face, and the uncertainty her story had brought. What am I doing? She questioned herself, tears streaming down her face. The emotional confusion left her exhausted, as if she were in an endless fight with herself. Deep down, she knew she couldn't run forever. Something needed to be done, but the choices didn't seem easy or obvious. There was a fork in the road: move forward, living the comforting lie of her reality, or plunge into the unknown abyss of truth. Every step seemed dangerous, every choice full of consequences she didn't know if she was ready to face. But Samantha's voice echoed, insistent, in her mind. It was on a gray morning, with fog enveloping the city like a heavy blanket, that Emma decided she needed help. The uncertainty was already unbearable, and determination, even fragile, was beginning to form. Seeking answers alone seemed impossible, so she sought the best detective money could hire. That's how she met Brandon, a man who carried the marks of many solved mysteries on his face, but who had a compassionate look, something Emma didn't expect. Brandon was young, perhaps more than Emma imagined for someone with so much experience. He listened patiently as she explained everything, from Claire's death to the strange encounter with Samantha. Every word came out heavy, as if the simple act of narrating her pain wore her down a little more. But Brandon didn't interrupt her, didn't judge her. He just stayed there, with a slightly furrowed brow, absorbing everything. "This is unusual," he said, carefully choosing his words, but with a tone that inspired confidence. "I know it sounds crazy," Emma murmured, almost ashamed of the story she had just told. But Brandon shook his head, like someone who had already seen more improbable things become real. "Believe me, Emma, I've seen a lot of things in this world. And if there's any truth to it, we'll find it." For the first time in a long time, Emma felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She was no longer alone. There was someone willing to walk beside her on this journey, someone who understood the dangers but didn't hesitate. As Emma spoke, Brandon took notes in a worn notebook, a habit that seemed older than he was. "Let's start with the basics," he said, looking her in the eyes. "The DNA test. If there's something wrong in the cemetery, this will give us a clear clue." Emma took a deep breath, feeling a mix of relief and dread. "What if I'm wrong?" she asked, doubt and fear still gripping her. Brandon gave a wry smile, almost warm. "Then we'll have certainty, but that's no reason not to try." Brandon's presence was comforting, but it also awakened something new in Emma, a spark of courage she barely remembered having. With each plan he outlined, she felt as if she was finally taking control of something, even if it was small. Grief had always left her adrift, but now there was a path, a direction to follow. Brandon's words were pragmatic, but they carried a dose of hope that made Emma believe, even if just a little, in the possibility of finding answers. There was a moment when Emma lost herself in thought, imagining what it would be like if Claire were alive. Hope was frightening, and Brandon noticed. "We're not going to rush things," he gently warned her. "But we're also not going to stop seeking the truth." The balance between caution and determination was what Emma needed. Brandon became a mentor but also a guide who helped her keep her feet on the ground. He understood the fine line between grief and the desperate need for renewal. As the days passed, Brandon brought more than just strategy. He brought a new perspective. "Pain can be a powerful motivator," he said once, while they were having coffee at a small restaurant. But it can also blind us. Emma absorbed those words, reflecting on how her grief had kept her paralyzed for so long. Brandon was like a lighthouse, illuminating parts of her pain she had never allowed herself to face. And slowly, she began to see a way out of the darkness. Emma realized that trusting someone after so much time keeping her secrets was difficult but necessary. Brandon was a stranger, yes, but also a lifeline. He asked questions she never wanted to answer but that were crucial. "Why did you never doubt what happened to Claire?" he asked. The answer was there, painful and raw, because accepting death was easier than questioning the lies. Emma felt guilt rising, but Brandon helped her process it with patience and firmness. When the DNA test was organized, Emma felt the weight of the decision. Everything was at stake now, and Brandon reminded her that the truth, as painful as it might be, was a necessary step. He encouraged her to face her fears, to confront whatever might come with determination. "Whatever it is, you'll be able to handle it," he said, and something in his tone made Emma believe. Brandon's support was not just professional, it was almost personal, a bond that grew as they faced the unknown together. Emma was preparing for battle, with Brandon by her side, and felt that destiny was about to play its cards. The DNA test was the next step, and every fiber of her being vibrated with a mix of fear and hope. The shadows of the past were still there, but now there was light, a mentor helping her move forward. And even if the truth was dark, Emma was more ready than ever. Whatever was hidden, she would face it. The day of the DNA test results arrived with an almost supernatural aura. Emma woke up feeling every muscle in her body tense, as if the universe itself was challenging her. Brandon arrived early, his presence bringing a bit of calm to the storm raging inside her. "It's okay to be scared," he said as they waited in the lab office. Emma couldn't respond, just nodded, feeling fear run through her veins like poison. It was the moment she had both awaited and feared with equal intensity. When the technician entered with the results, Emma could barely breathe. The silence that followed was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Brandon took the envelope, opening it with steady hands while Emma watched, her heart pounding. His expression was hard to read, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. "Emma," he began, his voice soft, almost hesitant, "the remains in the tomb do not belong to your daughter." The room spun, and Emma had to hold onto the arm of the chair to avoid falling. The shock was a wave that hit her, leaving her speechless. Everything she had believed over those 3 years seemed to crumble around her. Tears came before she could stop them, a mix of relief and terror. "Does this mean Claire might be alive?" she asked, almost unable to believe what she was saying. Brandon didn't respond immediately, but his eyes showed the truth she feared. The mystery was just beginning, and the journey would be much more dangerous than they had imagined. Emma felt a mix of emotions she didn't know how to process. Hope was such a rare feeling that it almost hurt, and yet fear made her want to run and hide. "What does this mean for us?" she asked, her voice breaking. Brandon carefully closed the envelope. "It means we have to continue," he said. The determination on his face was like a lighthouse, guiding Emma forward, even when everything inside her wanted to stop and scream. Leaving the lab was like crossing a portal. Emma didn't know if the world seemed brighter or darker, but she knew it was different. There was a new energy in her steps, an urgency pushing her forward. The truth was now a living flame, something that needed to be unearthed. "What's the next step?" she asked Brandon, still trying to process everything. He looked at her seriously. "Look for clues. Claire didn't disappear without a reason. There's something bigger at play here." His words echoed in Emma's mind as they moved on to the next phase of the investigation. The cemetery, once a place of farewells, had now transformed into the starting point for an unknown truth. Emma knew there was no turning back, that crossing the threshold would take her to dark places. But she also knew she had Brandon by her side, and that was an unexpected source of strength. They were together now, a duo against the world's secrets. Fear hadn't gone away, but it was accompanied by fierce determination. Emma never thought she would feel this again. The need to fight, to discover, to protect. As much as the past had been a weight, now it was also fuel. The puzzle pieces were beginning to move, and Emma knew she couldn't stop until she found them all. The only certainty was that the truth would never be easy, but she was ready to face it. The investigation took a dangerous turn faster than Emma and Brandon could have imagined. The first days were filled with frustrations and false leads, each one heightening the tension and fear. But amid all this uncertainty, unexpected allies emerged. An old friend of Claire's, named Melissa, got in touch, bringing information that could change everything. "Claire told me something strange before the accident," she said, her eyes full of memories and concern. Emma felt her heart tighten. What had Claire been hiding? Melissa revealed that Claire seemed scared, as if she was running from something or someone. "She talked about threats," Melissa continued, her voice trembling. It was the first concrete clue Emma and Brandon had, but it brought with it a new layer of fear. If Claire was being threatened, who was responsible? Emma began to realize that the world she lived in was much darker than she had imagined. Brandon, always the calmer of the duo, started making connections, but each clue brought them closer to invisible danger. Then the threats began. First, they were anonymous notes left at Emma's house door. "Stop digging," one read, the black ink staining the paper as if it were a death warning. Emma didn't know if it was paranoia or if they were truly being watched, but the fear was real. Brandon increased security and started carrying a weapon. "We're bothering someone," he said, his voice deep. The danger was palpable, and Emma's determination, once firm, wavered. But she knew she couldn't give up. The enemies were not just faceless shadows. They were real, with intentions that became more threatening each day. Brandon discovered that a criminal group was linked to the disappearance of wealthy young women, and Claire could have been involved, perhaps unknowingly. Emma felt crushed by the weight of the revelation. It was as if each new discovery threw her deeper into a bottomless pit. But there was something inside her that didn't break, a strength that continued to grow. Amid the chaos, new allies emerged. An investigative journalist named Peter, who had been trying to expose the criminal group for years, joined the team. He brought evidence of a corruption network but also warned Emma about the risks. "If you continue, you'll need to prepare for anything," he said, with a look that seemed to know well what was coming. Emma didn't want to think about the consequences, but she knew she had to. The mission was now as dangerous as it was personal. Emma's nights were filled with nightmares. She dreamed of Claire asking for help, but also of faceless enemies, ready to destroy everything she loved. Brandon and Peter formed a plan, a kind of dangerous game to lure the criminals and obtain information. Emma hesitated, fear gnawing at her. But the image of Claire, scared and alone, haunted her. "I can't fail her," she murmured, using her own words as a mantra. Fear consumed her, but determination was stronger. The tests didn't stop. A trap almost caught them off guard when a mysterious car started following Emma through the streets of her own city. Brandon intervened, but it was clear they were being watched. The pressure was suffocating, but Emma refused to be a victim. "I've lost too much already," she said, her voice laden with emotion. Danger was now part of the routine, and the line between grief and the fight for truth was becoming increasingly blurred. Amid all this, Emma found strengths she didn't know she had. Brandon and Peter's presence was crucial, but she also began to trust herself more. The threats, once paralyzing, now pushed her forward. She knew that if there was a chance to bring Claire back, she needed to continue, even if fear was always present. Each step seemed a challenge, but each small progress was a triumph. Emma was no longer just surviving, she was fighting. Then came a twist. A mysterious message arrived, signed only with the letter C. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. Was it Claire? Or was it a cruel trap? Brandon analyzed the message, but there were no easy answers. They were in a dangerous game where the next move could be the last. Emma prepared to face whatever came, her heart racing and her determination unbreakable. The path was getting narrower, but she knew she couldn't stop now. With the mysterious message in hand, Emma felt a mix of hope and dread. The letter C was a sign, something that could be from Claire or perhaps a cruel mistake. Brandon decided they needed to follow the clue cautiously, and Peter joined them, bringing maps and information that could help them. The tension in the air was almost unbearable, and Emma felt her heart beat unevenly. They were approaching something big, something that could change everything, but the fear of a trap was constant. The clue led them to an old abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a place that seemed forgotten by time. The sound of wood creaking under their feet was almost as loud as the echo of Emma's heartbeat. Brandon, with the weapon in hand, entered first, and Peter followed shortly after. Emma hesitated for a moment, her mind flooded with memories of Claire. Fear was overwhelming, but she knew she had to continue. The truth was close, and the hope of a reunion was what drove her. Inside the warehouse, the air was heavy and smelled of mold. The silence was so dense it seemed to threaten to swallow them all. Brandon signaled for Emma to stay behind, but she couldn't pull away. "If Claire is here, I need to see her," she said, her voice broken but full of determination. They followed a trail of footprints in the dust, each step taking them deeper into the darkness. Fear made Emma's senses sharp, as if every shadow could hide a danger. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse walls, and everyone froze. Brandon raised his hand, signaling them to stay still. The noise came from a narrow corridor to the left, and the tension was almost unbearable. Emma felt her hands tremble but continued. They approached, adrenaline running wild. Every step felt like a test of courage, and Emma didn't know if her heart could withstand the weight. The secret cave was revealing itself, but what would they find there? When they reached the end of the corridor, a metal door separated them from something that seemed important. Peter checked for traps while Emma tried to control her breathing. Fear was an old acquaintance, but now it seemed to have taken on a life of its own. Brandon opened the door slowly, and a faint ray of light illuminated a small room where papers were scattered everywhere. Emma entered, and her eyes immediately found something that made her heart stop. A recent photograph of Claire, with an expression of fear. The image was proof that Claire was alive, but also a confirmation that she was in danger. Emma almost collapsed, but Brandon held her. "It's not over yet," he said, his voice firm. The clues were all there, like fragments of a puzzle that still didn't make sense. "She's close, Emma," Peter murmured as he sifted through the papers. Hope was so intense it made Emma feel light, but the fear of losing everything again kept her grounded. Then an old, dusty phone began to ring. They all looked at each other, the sound echoing like a scream in the darkness. Emma picked up the phone with trembling hands, and the voice on the other end made her freeze. "You're getting too close," a man said, his voice cold and full of threat. Emma couldn't respond, and the call ended. Danger was real, and they knew that every move exposed them further. But hope, now stronger than ever, kept Emma from giving up. Brandon looked at Emma with concern but also with shared determination. "We're too close to stop now," he said as Emma nodded, even with fear devouring her inside. The secret cave was almost revealed, but what they would find could be salvation or total destruction. Emma took a deep breath, knowing that this journey still had many trials to face. The next step was uncertain, but the desire to reunite with Claire was greater than any fear. The discovery in the warehouse led them to an old rural property, a place that seemed straight out of a horror movie. The house was almost in ruins, surrounded by trees swaying in the wind as if whispering ancient secrets. Emma could barely breathe as she followed Brandon and Peter along the trail of broken stones leading to the entrance. She knew this was the decisive moment, the point where everything could either collapse or be resolved. The hope of seeing Claire again was almost palpable, but the fear of an ambush was always present. Brandon, with the weapon in hand, signaled for them to wait while he checked if it was safe. Emma held herself, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. Suddenly, a muffled scream echoed from the house, and Emma's blood ran cold. "Claire," she called out, without realizing what she was doing. Desperation took over, and before she could be stopped, she ran toward the house. Brandon caught up and held her by the arm. "Wait," he said, but Emma couldn't. Not anymore. The reunion she had longed for seemed to be just a few steps away. They entered the house cautiously, the floor creaking under their feet. The place was a maze of narrow corridors and dusty rooms, each corner more threatening than the last. Emma felt suffocated by the darkness, but her determination was greater. They followed the sound of the scream, which turned into sobs. When they reached a locked door, Emma didn't hesitate. "Claire," she shouted, banging on the door hard. The weak voice that came from inside almost made her heart stop. "Mom?" the voice replied, broken but alive. Brandon and Peter kicked the door open, and what Emma saw made her fall to her knees. Claire was there, chained to a chair, her face pale and eyes full of tears. Shock and joy mixed in a whirlwind of emotions. Emma ran to her, trying to free her, but the chains were thick and tight. Claire was crying, sobbing as Emma whispered words of comfort, maternal love flowing like a tide. "I'm here," Emma said, her voice broken but full of emotion. But the moment of relief was interrupted when heavy footsteps echoed behind them. Brandon turned quickly, pointing the weapon, and the ensuing confrontation was inevitable. A man appeared in the doorway, his face hidden behind a mask, and a deadly tension filled the air. "You shouldn't be here," he growled, and the situation seemed about to explode. Emma placed herself in front of Claire, like a lioness protecting her cub, even though fear devoured her inside. It was a trial that would require all the courage she had. Brandon shouted for the man to drop the weapon, and the confrontation turned into a chaos of shouts and threats. Emma couldn't think. All that mattered was protecting Claire. Peter tried to move forward, but the man made a swift move, and a shot was fired, echoing through the house like thunder. Emma screamed, the sound reverberating through her entire body, while Brandon lunged to disarm the man. The fight was intense, a dance of life and death, and Emma held Claire, praying for it to end soon. Finally, with a precise blow, Brandon managed to take down the man. The police, whom Peter had called minutes earlier, arrived just in time to arrest the criminal, and the nightmare seemed to have ended. But Emma knew the real fight was still to come. Freeing Claire from the chains was a moment filled with tears and relief, but also fear. "I'm sorry, Mom," Claire said, her voice choked with guilt and remorse. Emma held her tightly, her heart still racing. "You're here, that's all that matters," she replied, her voice full of unconditional love. The reunion was a reconnection of souls that had been torn apart. Claire was weak but alive, and Emma knew the next steps would be difficult. But for the first time in years, she felt there was a real chance for renewal, to rebuild everything that had been lost. Tears streamed down, but now mixed with a relief she never thought she would feel again. The trial had been hard, but love, courage, and hope had prevailed. The dawn light began to tint the sky as Emma and Claire finally left the house, their faces marked by tears but their hearts a little lighter. The battle was over, but the emotional weight was still there, clinging to every breath Emma took. She looked at Claire, still fragile and scared, but alive. The feeling of relief washed over her like a wave, and she held her daughter's hand firmly, as if she would never let her go. The embrace they shared was the healing they both needed, a long-awaited reunion that seemed unreal. Brandon watched closely, his face showing fatigue but also silent satisfaction. He knew how much Emma had fought to get there, how much she had faced her own fear and the obstacles that nearly broke her. "We did it," he said, and Emma couldn't help but smile, though it was shy. It was true, the reward was not just having Claire back, but also the feeling that a mother's love could overcome any darkness. Emma felt stronger, as if a part of her that was lost had come back to life. Claire, however, was full of remorse. Her eyes avoided Emma's, as if the weight of guilt was suffocating her. "I never meant to hurt you," she murmured, her words broken by emotion. Emma held her by the shoulders, looking at her with all the love that still inhabited her heart. "You're here now, and that's all that matters," she said, her voice soft but firm. The connection between mother and daughter had never been stronger, so full of understanding and forgiveness. It was a moment of healing, an emotional reward that no money could buy. Minutes passed slowly, but the relief was real. Claire told everything from her involvement with the criminal group to the desperate choice to fake her own death. "I thought I was protecting you," she said, her face covered in tears. Emma listened to every word attentively, her heart aching from all the suffering Claire had faced alone. It was painful to hear, but it was also an essential step for both their renewal. The truth was finally coming to light, and it was more powerful than any lie. The scars, both physical and emotional, wouldn't disappear immediately, but Emma was willing to face it with Claire by her side. The love that bound them was a force that no threat could destroy. "We'll get through this together," Emma promised, determination shining in her eyes. It was a promise filled with hope, a new chance to build something from the ruins. Claire, her face still wet with tears, nodded, holding her mother's hand with the strength she had. The reward was this moment, this chance to do things differently. The climax of the journey arrived explosively, as if destiny was determined to test Emma and Claire once again. The police operation, organized based on the evidence Emma, Brandon, and Peter had gathered, was underway. The streets were filled with sirens and flashing lights, and the sound of helicopters hovering over the city filled the air. Emma watched from a distance, her heart in her throat, as the officers moved to arrest the leaders of the criminal group that had almost destroyed her life. The fear was still a shadow, but this time, she felt stronger, as if she had been reborn from the ashes. Claire was by her side, holding her hand tightly. The fear still lived within them, but now there was something more, a courage they could no longer ignore. "Everything will be all right," Emma whispered, more to herself than to Claire. The threats that once paralyzed them now pushed them forward. It was a moment of resurrection, not just for justice but for hope. The barriers that fear had built in their lives were being torn down, and Emma could feel the renewal it brought. The final confrontation was intense. The police stormed the criminal group's hideout, and gunshots echoed through the night. Emma and Claire were safe in a protected location, but every sound made Emma's heart race. She thought of Brandon, who was there, risking everything to ensure the nightmare ended once and for all. The sacrifice and courage of everyone around her were a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there were people willing to fight for good. When the news arrived that the leaders had been arrested, Emma could hardly believe it. The relief was so intense that she collapsed, tears falling uncontrollably. Claire held her, and for a moment, all that mattered was that they were alive, together, and finally safe. It was as if an immense weight had been lifted from their shoulders. The fight had been long and painful, but the result was a rebirth, a second chance to live. Emma looked up at the sky, feeling that, in some way, Claire had been returned to her, not just physically but emotionally. Brandon returned, exhausted but with a smile that lit up his face. "It's over," he said, the word loaded with meaning. Emma hugged him tightly, gratitude overflowing from her heart. That moment was the resurrection of everything she thought she had lost forever. Claire also thanked Brandon, her voice still shaky but full of sincerity. It was a new beginning, a chance to rebuild their lives with the certainty that a mother's love could overcome any darkness. Emma felt stronger, as if a part of her that was lost had come back to life. The city seemed different the next morning, as if it had woken up from a nightmare. The headlines celebrated the arrests, and the crime network began to be dismantled. Emma and Claire, though still healing, felt that life was offering them a new blank page. The fear hadn't completely disappeared, but now it was accompanied by a resilience that surprised them. They were ready to face whatever came, knowing that resurrection was a precious gift. Emma began to realize that grief, which was once like a chain holding her to the past, was now a memory pushing her forward. Losing Claire once had been the greatest pain of her life, but finding her again taught her the true value of renewal. The pain still existed, but now it was mixed with immense gratitude. "Let's live for real," Emma said to Claire, her voice firm but full of emotion. And living was what they intended to do, with all the love and courage they had. Claire also went through her own resurrection. Fear and guilt still visited her in moments of silence, but she was learning to forgive herself, to give herself a new chance. Emma's love was an anchor, but Claire knew she needed to strengthen herself. "I promise I'll make it worth it," she told her mother, and Emma believed her. Their rebirth was something that required daily effort, but it was an effort worth making. Life would never be the same, but perhaps that was something good. A few weeks passed, and Emma and Claire's lives began to find a calmer rhythm, something that seemed almost surreal after everything they had been through. The cemetery, once a place of inescapable sadness, was now a space of renewal. Emma and Claire returned together, not to cry but to close a chapter. They carried flowers in their hands, and this time, as they approached the tomb, there was not just pain but a serene acceptance. The name on the tombstone was now correct: Anna Lewis, the woman whose mystery had been involuntarily linked to theirs. Emma carefully placed the flowers, her hands still trembling a bit. "Finally, we can leave this behind," she said, with a sad but relieved smile. Claire held her mother's hand, and both allowed themselves a moment of silence. The cycle closed there, not as a full stop but as a comma, a necessary pause to breathe before continuing. Grief still existed, but now it was part of something bigger, something that pushed them to live more fully and truly. The reconciliation between mother and daughter was a process that continued to grow, with each conversation, each unexpected laugh. Emma felt her house, once so silent and cold, now vibrate with renewed energy. Claire filled the empty spaces with music, laughter, and life. There were dinners with friends, plans for trips, and nights where they stayed up late, reminiscing old memories and creating new ones. Emma's unconditional love became a strong foundation, something that neither time nor danger could destroy. Brandon and Peter also remained present, like part of the family Emma never knew she needed. Their gratitude for these men, who risked everything for justice, was profound. Emma organized a dinner to thank them, and the night was filled with stories and promises that the future would be different. "We did this together," Emma said, raising a toast, and everyone laughed, even though some tears still fell. The end of the fight was not the end of the story, but the beginning of something new, something full of possibilities. Claire began to get involved in social causes, helping others who had lost loved ones or faced threats. It was a way to transform her pain into something powerful, something that could help others find hope. Emma felt proud with every step her daughter took, knowing that the healing process was long, but that they were on the right path. The feeling of relief was still strong, but now it was accompanied by a purpose that bonded mother and daughter even more intensely. Life, no matter how unpredictable and complicated it was, began to make sense again. Emma started planning trips again, something she hadn't done since losing Claire. "Shall we go to that place we always talked about?" she suggested, her eyes shining with expectation. Claire smiled, the kind of smile Emma feared she would never see again. "Yes, let's live everything we lost," the daughter replied, and Emma knew right then and there that they were ready to start anew. The end was just the beginning of a new adventure. In the city, the case was still being discussed. The headlines still echoed the drama the two had faced, but Emma and Claire learned not to let themselves be defined by the past. They carried their scars with pride, as marks of a story of overcoming. They walked side by side, not just as mother and daughter but as survivors who found strength in each other. The end of darkness brought a light that continued to grow, illuminating a future that seemed brighter each day. In the end, life was not a series of easy answers or perfect solutions but a collection of moments, reunions, second chances. Emma and Claire knew they would still have difficult days, but the difference was that now they were together, prepared to face whatever came. And as the sun set, tinting the sky with vivid colors, the two moved forward, with lighter hearts but stronger souls. The end of that story was the beginning of something infinitely greater, the life they still had to live.